Hey guys, welcome to the Screwtape Letters Lesson 4. We're going to be discussing Chapter 10 today, so make sure you have that open in your book so you can read along. And if you don't have a copy of the book, use the link in the description to get yourself a copy. With that said, let's get started.
My dear Wormwood, I was delighted to hear from Triptweeze that your patient has made some very desirable new acquaintances, and that you seem to have used this event in a really promising manner. I gather that the middle-aged married couple who called at his office are just the sort of people we want him to know. Rich, smart, superficially intellectual, and brightly skeptical about everything in the world. I gather they are even vaguely pacifist, not on moral grounds, but from an ingrained habit of belittling anything that concerns the great mass of their fellow men, and from a dash of purely fashionable and literary communism. This is excellent, and you seem to have made good use of all his social, sexual, and intellectual vanity. Tell me more. Did he commit himself deeply? I don't mean in words. There is a subtle play of looks and tones and laughs by which a mortal can imply that he is of the same party as those to whom he is speaking. That is the kind of betrayal you should specially encourage, because the man does not fully realize it himself, and by the time he does, you will have made a withdrawal difficult. No doubt he must very soon realize that his own faith is in direct opposition to the assumptions on which all the conversation of his new friends is based. I don't think that matters much, provided you can persuade him to postpone any open acknowledgement of the fact, and his, with the aid of shame, pride, modesty, and vanity, will be easy to do. As long as the postponement lasts, he will be in a false position. He will be silent when he ought to speak, and laugh when he ought to be silent. He will assume, at first only by his manner, but presently by his words, all sorts of cynical and skeptical attitudes which are not really his. But if you play him well, this may become his. All mortals tend to turn into the thing they are pretending to be. This is elementary. The real question is how to prepare for the enemy's counterattack. The first thing is to delay as long as possible the moment at which he realizes this new pleasure as a temptation. Since the enemy's servants have been preaching about the world as one of the great standard temptations for 2,000 years, this might seem difficult to do. But fortunately, they have said very little about it for the last few decades. In modern Christian writings, though I see much, indeed more than I like, about mammon, I see few of the old warnings about worldly vanities and choice of friends and the value of time. All that your patient would probably classify as Puritanism, and may I remark in passing that the value we have given to that word is one of the really solid triumphs of the last 100 years. By it we rescue annually thousands of humans from temperance, chastity, and sobriety of life. Sooner or later, however, the real nature of his new friends must become clear to him, and then your tactics must depend on the patient's intelligence. If he is a big enough fool, you can get him to realize the character of his friends only while they are absent. Their presence can be made to sweep away all criticism. If this succeeds, he can be induced to live, as I have known many humans live, for quite long periods, two parallel lives. He will not only appear to be, but actually be, a different man in each of the circles he frequents. Failing this, there is a subtler and more entertaining method. He can be made to take a positive pleasure in the perception that the two sides of his life are inconsistent. This is done by exploiting his vanity. He can be taught to enjoy kneeling beside the grocer on Sunday just because he remembers that the grocer could not possibly understand the urbane and mocking world which he has inhabited on Saturday evening, and contrariwise to enjoy the bawdy and blasphemy over the coffee with these admirable friends all the more because he is aware of a deeper, spiritual world within him which they cannot understand. You see the idea? The worldly friends touch him on one side and the grocer on the other, and he is the complete, balanced, complex man who sees around them all. Thus, while being permanently treacherous to at least two sets of people, he will feel, instead of shame, a continual undercurrent of self-satisfaction. Finally, if all else fails, you can persuade him, in defiance of conscience, to continue the new acquaintance on the ground that he is, in some unspecified way, doing these people good by the mere fact of drinking their cocktails and laughing at their jokes, and that to cease to do so would be priggish, intolerant, and, of course, puritanical. Meanwhile, you will, of course, take the obvious precaution of seeing that this new development induces him to spend more than he can afford and to neglect his work and his mother. Her jealousy and alarm and his increasing evasiveness or rudeness will be invaluable for the aggravation of the domestic tension. Your affectionate uncle, Screwtape.
So this week in the Screwtape Letters, we get to see one of C.S. Lewis' greatest strengths, and that strength is his ability to be able to understand people's motivations. If you read more of his works, you'll see right away that the reason he was very good at this was because he actually did this to himself all the time. He was constantly assessing his own motivations. In fact, here's a quote from one of his other books that I really love called Mere Christianity. "How is it that people who are quite obviously eaten up with pride can say they believe in God and appear to themselves very religious? And any of us may at any moment be in this death trap. Luckily, we have a test. Whenever we find our religious life is making us feel that we are good, above all, that we are better than someone else, I think we may be sure that we are being acted on, not by God, but by the devil. The real test of being in the presence of God is that you either forget about yourself altogether, or you see yourself as a small, dirty object. It is better to forget about yourself altogether." So what does this have to do with this chapter in the Screwtape Letters? Well, Screwtape describes this couple as being middle-aged, rich, somewhat smart, superficially skeptical, and that they belittle everything around them that the majority of people like. Now, what's wrong with this? Well, did you notice something? There isn't really anything overtly wrong with this. These people aren't Satanists. They're not drug dealers. They aren't even, terrorists or anything major that somebody could point to and said, that is obviously wrong. What's bad about these people is that they're cool. Now, when I say cool, I don't mean necessarily what you think is cool. What I mean is that these people are countercultural. They don't follow the crowd. They march to the beat of their own drum. People like this always seem cool to us. It doesn't matter who you are. You might think that, I don't necessarily like the cool people, but you do like people who don't follow the crowd. This is why you are constantly trying to find your own style of clothing, or maybe your own hair color, or maybe it's why you think that one guy is so smart. It's because they're cool. It's because they don't follow the crowd. This is why these people are so dangerous to the patient. It's because they don't follow the crowd, because they march to the beat of their own drum, because they're countercultural. They can sit on the sidelines and be skeptical of everything, belittle everything, and offer nothing in return. I once had a student come into my office and she had a question because a friend of hers who wasn't a Christian asked her this question and she had no idea how to answer it. So we spent a lot of time talking through what she asked and coming up with the best way to answer it so that this person might be able to get a little better understanding of God. So we prayed about what we came up with, and that student left my office feeling pretty good about her answer. A few days later, I ran into the student and I said, "Hey, how did that conversation go?" And she said, as soon as I brought up the fact that I had an answer to my friend's question, my friend said she didn't care. Now, why would you ask a question that you didn't care what the answer is? Well, when you don't stand for anything or you don't believe in anything, you can offer nothing in return. All you have to do is sit on the sidelines and reject all the answers and belittle all the answers, but then give nothing in return. This is what Screwtape is hoping for with this couple that is going to meet with the patient. Because they can sit on the sidelines and belittle all of his beliefs and make him feel cool because he gets to hang out with them. And then they will destroy his belief in Jesus, and he'll thank them for it. Now, why would any person put up with this? Well, the answer is simply pride. Yeah, nobody likes to be belittled. Nobody likes to be talked down to. But because of pride, we want to be around the cool people in our lives. Now, some of you might already be thinking, I don't care what the cool people in my school think. Well, that may be true, but cool is a relative term. Just because the cool crowd isn't someone you care about, there are cool people that you think are cool, who you really care about what their opinion is. When I was in high school, I made a friend, and she was not what you would consider somebody that I would normally hang out with. She was with the group of people who were very anti the cool crowd. Anything that the cool crowd did, they did the opposite. These people had a lot of chains, they had a lot of piercings, a lot of different color hairstyles, and maybe even a few of them had some real tattoos. Hard to say. I was young. Anyway, I got to know this girl pretty well, and I got to know some of her friends. And a lot of times they would ask me, what do the cool people think about us? And I would say, they don't think anything. I think. I wasn't in that group. I just kind of sat in the middle. Anyway, the point is this. After a while, this girl and I, even though we became fairly good friends, her friends in the anti-cool crowd didn't understand why she kept talking to me. In fact, they didn't want her to talk to me. Now, why would people who supposedly don't care what anybody thinks about them care about what one of their friends is doing? The reason is because we all seek the approval of the cool people in our groups or in the people that we know. They might not necessarily be part of the cool crowd, but they are definitely cool in our own minds. When we crave the approval of the cool people in our lives, we will go to any lengths to get it. Many times we'll even deny our own selves in order to get their approval. Now, Screwtape recognizes this, and he also recognizes the fact that if the patient realizes what's happening and openly admits it to himself, then the game is up. He will turn away from what he's doing. So Screwtape proposes a strategy that forces the patient to not admit this problem as long as possible. The reason he wants him to do this is because he wants to make sure that he becomes more and more like the people that he's hanging out with. He puts it this way: all mortals tend to turn into the thing they are pretending to be. Screwtape's strategy is to make sure that the patient spends as much time with these people as possible, so he'll become more and more like them. Eventually, he'll get to the point to where he can't admit to himself that he's doing something wrong, because then he will feel guilty for what he's become. Many of us have seen this happen in our own lives with people that we know. For instance, how many of you have ever had a friend who's been in a bad relationship? You know it's bad, your friends know it's bad, everybody knows it's bad. There isn't a single good thing about this relationship. Yet, no matter how many times you tell your friend, get out, they don't listen. Why? Well, the reason is that they don't want to admit to themselves that they were wrong. To get out of the relationship, they have to admit that I was wrong to get into it in the first place, that I made a mistake, that I did something wrong. And they don't want to do that. Most of us don't want to admit when we're wrong, but especially when we've intentionally made a decision later on that we realize was a bad one. A lot of times we'll try to work out of that bad situation by staying in it, when the reality is the only answer is to admit how we were wrong to get out of it. But our pride keeps us in place. And that's exactly what Screwtape is proposing for the patient. Screwtape admits the fact that God eventually will intervene in what's going on. So he proposes a strategy that involves the patient's pride. He says, get the patient to take pride in the fact that he leads a double life. Now, this might seem crazy, but it's actually something that many of us have done and not even realize that we're doing. Screwtape describes the process of getting the patient to take pride in the fact that he can be a spiritual person on Sundays, the person that he's just recently become by becoming a Christian, and then also be the witty skeptic with his new friends on Saturdays. This way, he can take pride in being able to be both godly and worldly at the same time. Now, we all hate two-faced people. people who are Christians on Sunday, but a totally different person the rest of the week. But the thing is that it's actually a very easy trap to fall into. First off, a lot of times, the people that we see the rest of the week are completely different from the people that we see on Sunday. So a lot of times those two groups don't overlap. Secondly, when we crave the attention of the cool people in our lives, we're willing to do just about anything to get it, even denying who we are the rest of the week. Finally, it makes us feel good to have friends in both groups because we feel like, wow, look how great I am being able to talk to so many diverse kind of people. This is the trap that we fall into. But what happens is we end up lying to both groups of people, and we end up becoming a completely empty shell. We don't even know who we are anymore because we're not the same person wherever we go. We're somebody different whenever we're with a different group of people. Now, there is a way out of this trap, and that involves humbleness. Now, that's not an easy thing to do, but what we have to do is we have to humble ourselves and admit, I'm a liar. I have been lying to both of these groups of people, both my Christian and non-Christian friends. I'm not being who God has called me to be. Now, God actually offers very specific instructions on how to do this and what it's going to be like. It's in James chapter 4. In verses 8 through 10, it says, "Draw near to God, and he will draw near to you. Cleanse your hands, you sinners, and purify your hearts, you double-minded. Be wretched and mourn and weep. Let your laughter be turned to mourning and your joy to gloom. Humble yourselves before the Lord, and he will exalt you." God is offering you a way out of this trap, but it requires you to be humble. Now, humbleness sometimes gets confused with saying, oh, I'm not good at anything. That's not being humble. In fact, actually, you should take joy and pride in being good at something. The pridefulness that I'm talking about is one that thinks that you are so much better than other people that you don't have to tell the truth or be yourself. See, sometimes we try to say that not being yourself is because other people are being mean to you, so you're afraid to be yourself. And while there is some truth to that, the reality is that you're not confident enough in yourself to tell the truth about who you are. You're only willing to lie to people. And so what we have to do is we have to humble ourselves and admit that we're liars. The Bible admits that this is not an easy process. It talks about weeping and wailing and being in pain. It's something that is not going to be fun to experience. But what happens is that you stop seeking the approval of the people around you and you start seeking the approval of God. And when you seek the approval of God above anyone else, you actually find yourself. And then people can actually start seeing who you really are. So let's remember this. If you're going to be true, if you're going to be true to God and true to yourself, you have to be humble. You can't be a faker. You can't be two-faced. You have to be who God calls you to be. Guys, thank you so much for joining me for Lesson 4 in the Screwtape Letters. I hope that you continue to enjoy this, and if you did like this, make sure you leave a thumbs up and a comment down in the description there. And I look forward to seeing you guys next week. Take care.